Man, I was so dissatisfied in my life. It was like a previous life that I quit my job, sold my house, let my vehicle get repossessed so that I could buy a van, live out of it, and make a change. And I was so discontent because, if nothing else, it was hypocrisy. It was hypocritical because I look at reality and I look at life, and we talk about it all of the time, but life is short. You've got 60, 70, 80. Those who are blessed have 100 years. But regardless, all of those are short. It's not a very long amount of time. And so we talk about things like taking advantage of the life that you have, cherishing the life that you have, living fully today. And so it doesn't make sense to see your life as miraculous and speak about it as miraculous and as a gift, but then wake up in the morning and trudge through mud to a job that you hate. And truly, I was working a normal job, but it didn't benefit anyone. So not only was it work that I hated, that I couldn't stand, but it was of benefit to no one. And so the hypocrisy was destroying me. It was corrupting my soul. Because how can I, if I imagine that I have a calendar in front of me and I'm told how many days that I have within the entirety of my life, say I have a total of 80 years, 70 years, and I know the exact day that my life will end, well, it wouldn't make sense then to end each day, mark off another day on the calendar, and look back and realize, all right, well, I just spent that day giving energy towards things that I hate and benefit no one. It's kind of ridiculous if you think about it. And so for me, I had to make a change, and I didn't have very many options. So I do understand that it is a real thing. I really sold everything to live out of a van. And if you know me or if you've seen me make that decision, you might look at me and think, well, that guy is crazy. He has lost his mind. And I do understand that, but I think it's more ridiculous, for me at least, if I were to keep going down a path that was not sustainable. Not sustainable, not redemptive, and not oriented towards becoming the best version of myself. And if you look at that calendar and you know when your end will come and you're marking off those days, I think a voice is going to scream inside of you, and it's going to say, when are we going to make a change? We know that we have this one life. We are on earth with these people that we love right now. We have this one life. We're meant to make the most of it. When are we going to make a change and actually make the most of it? But days keep moving on, and if you have an attitude of tomorrow, 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 in the future when things are right, the day to make a change will never come. And so for me, I had to do something drastic. I had to risk it all, go all in, do something random. And so I'm still in that position. I am. None of this is to say that I have discovered my purpose. I couldn't tell you what my purpose is. I couldn't put it into words. But I do know the path that I was walking before wasn't it. And I do know that as I walk down this current path, my purpose unravels. And although I couldn't put it into words, I believe I can look back in retrospect and I will see the life that I've lived, and it will be a motif of my purpose. I will be able to see it in retrospect. But it's really interesting to ask why have men lost our sense of purpose? Why have we men lost our sense of purpose? Why have us men lost our sense of purpose? And one of the reasons why it's interesting is because it assumes that we either desire to have a sense of purpose or we actually have an innate sense of purpose, and not only a sense of purpose but an actual purpose, something that needs to be done, something that we need to be subordinate to. And we suffer as a consequence of being distanced from that purpose, from not fulfilling it. And I talk about disunity, I talk about division, and I never fully even, I myself don't know what I mean when I'm talking about those things. But I've thought about that more lately, and we are, I walk through the world and my heart is wrenched and in pain because it might be because I'm a highly neurotic person and I can't help but empathize with other people. But I see a man walking the streets pushing a cart, and he's got lesions all over his body. He's homeless and has obviously been out in the rain and the elements, and his body has transformed and become sickly as a result of living that life. And I can't help, every time I see somebody, especially somebody in a situation of intense suffering, I can't help but subliminally ask, well, what if that was me? And then my imagination goes to that place, and I really do imagine that it is me. And I see a man who has some mental struggles, and he's walking through the park, and he has his caretaker following him. And she sits him down on a park bench, and she sits across from him. She gets out her phone and starts talking to people on the phone, and he is full of energy. He is a grown adult, but he is trying to play. Again, he's the type of individual that needs a caretaker. So there's something going on, and he's sitting there squirming, anxious because he's in a park, but he is being forced to sit there because she wants to talk on her phone. And I see that, and I'm like, let that guy play. Let the kids play. He's not a kid, but let the kids play. Let us play. Let us enjoy life. And I can see his suffering as a result of not having this penned up energy, and he'll literally run around until he's forced to sit. And I see this man pushing a cart with lesions all over his body. And I imagine myself as them. And I can't help but think the world would be a better place if they are in excess suffering, and the world would be a better place if they weren't in excess suffering. And it is everywhere. It is everywhere. And I think about that, and I see people suffering, and I understand that suffering and struggle is a part of life, and you shouldn't judge other people's suffering or their struggles because you don't know what they've been through, and maybe that struggle that they're going through in that moment, that adversity that they're facing, is actually good for them. It is good for their eternal soul. But if you have been in states of extreme pain, you know that it reaches a point where the unrelenting suffering is so brutal and so intense at points that it feels like the whole world is pointed down at you, the whole world is attacking you. And when it doesn't relent, when you get no reprieve, after a while, you start to believe that the whole world is against you. it becomes increasingly arduous and difficult to not let bitterness and resentment build up within you. And if bitterness and resentment does build up within you, you start to become a person who is not oriented towards redemption and oriented towards making things better. But the fruit, it is a bad fruit, but the fruit of resentment and bitterness is a desire to actually make the world a worse place. You have a voice of temptation in your mind, and that voice is yelling at you, or it is whispering to you to bring other people down with you. And so that is the cycle, that there's so much excess suffering in the world, and that excess suffering makes it more arduous and difficult than it increases people's burden. It increases the burden of the individual, meaning the burden to have love in your heart and be oriented towards making the world a better place, and not let bitterness and resentment rise up within you. Because when bitterness and resentment rise up within you, then once that overtakes you, you start to subconsciously or deliberately try to make the world a worse place. And I think that's the cycle that we've found ourselves in, that most of us are in that boat, and the world is much harder than it needs to be. And because it's much harder than it needs to be, and every economic industry and the pillars of society, the principalities of society, always seem to be attacking us and hating us and wanting what is worse for us. So it feels like the whole world is against us, and then we become more divided, and it is a downward spiral. And so in regards to this question of why have men lost our sense of purpose? Why have men lost our sense of purpose? We are within that cycle, and it is so sad to me. It is very true that the world is against us, and I myself cannot dwell on that. I can see it to be clearly true. I'll elaborate further on why the world is against us by saying that in regards to the purpose of men, I heard someone say a while ago, and it stuck with me, that the American dream is not to buy a house and own land, XYZ, and to own things. That is not the American dream. The American dream is the freedom to create, the ability to be an entrepreneur. And we think of entrepreneurship as like a specific career field. There's people who are chefs, artists, mechanics, entrepreneurs, professors. But that doesn't have to be the case. Somebody who is a chef can be an entrepreneur as well. You don't have to always work for the entrepreneur. The American dream, in my opinion, has been and was the ability to have interests, have a vocation, something that you love to do, and not be so inclined, not be forced to work for another individual, but rather you can start your own venture. You can start your own company. You can work for yourself. And that is the American dream. And so the reason why it's the American dream is because we have had not necessarily what you would call a surplus economy or something that you would call capitalist economy. That's not what I'm getting at. But rather, we've had less corruption than what we've currently have now. Money was free flowing. Things weren't so rigid and tight. And so you could start something, and you could start something that today would seem menial, like like starting a pizza shop, starting a coffee shop. I've traveled around the country, and truthfully, there are very few coffee shops that are actually owned by entrepreneurs, owned by individuals. I've gone to coffee shops that even seem that way, and then I look further into what's going on there, and they're owned by a venture capitalist firm. So they're owned by an investment firm. So how rare is it that it doesn't matter what your vocation or what your interest is, it has become so rare that the individual, the man or woman, but it is the utmost desire of man to have this type of purpose, to be able to follow their interests and not be at the mercy of another person telling them what to do, how to do it, what to think, why to think. Freedom is man's, it is at the core of a man's soul. And so how rare is it though that any type of business that you go to is owned by one actual entrepreneur. And the reason why that has become so rare is because the problem isn't the amount of money in our economy. The problem is the free flowing of money into our economy. And the reason why the free flowing of money into our economy is so tight, is not fluid, is because there is abysmal corruption. There is unrelenting corruption from a small group of people. And we'll not get into that because that's a topic for another day, but it's kind of ridiculous that everything is oriented towards money. I will say that. It is ridiculous that everything is oriented towards money. It's ridiculous. I mean, imagine a fire department. Their main goal is to make as much money as possible. When you think about it, it actually doesn't make sense that a hospital's main goal would be to make as much money as possible. And that is the goal of a hospital. And all of that could be okay if it weren't for the corruption, if it weren't for the strange collusion that happens between our social structures, i.e., the government, and the biggest companies of which all of the market shares have consolidated to. And I bring up the hospital and I bring up the aspect of industries being against you because the issue isn't only the stealing of the consolidation of market share and the corruption that brings about the rigidity of money and the lack of free-flowing money, but also there's a lot of lies, and we are sold things that entrap us more, like food that is horrible for us and steals our energy and poisons us. We are sold debt, and debt traps us. We're sold a lot of things, and we have been sold a lot of things that we don't need. And so my point with all of that is that I don't feel bad for myself because I can't afford to feel bad for myself. If I start to feel bad for myself, then I'll really be trapped. But I can't help but feel somewhat sad for the generation, especially below me. Because it's very confusing. There's a generation of, especially men, but a generation above who have sold the generation below down the river, meaning the younger men, the younger generation is in a horrible spot, and we have sacrificed them. We have made their lives way more arduous and difficult than it needs to be. And it's not for the benefit of the society. Not only does it make their individual lives worse, it makes the whole culture and society worse. But not only does it make it worse now, it makes it worse, even exponentially worse later. And so the only thing that it's good for it is good for a small group of people right now. but it's not good for anybody long term. The nature of our society. The nature of our society. Corrupt. Right. So, why have men lost our sense of purpose? Well, I say all of that because that's kind of why we have lost our sense of purpose. We do have a sense of purpose, but to work hard and to make sacrifices, life, especially for a man, is about sacrifice. So I can actually bear with going to a job that I hate and doing work that I don't enjoy. But if it is work that I don't enjoy and it doesn't better people, it's not for a greater good, for a greater purpose, then what's the point? It is pointless. That is the thing that is hypocritical. And so men have this game set up currently, which is that the game has been rigged. The game is currently rigged, and it has been rigged for a long time. And the principalities, the structure, there's a small group of people who are against them and constantly attacking them and making life harder. And so we kind of get to a point of cognitive dissonance, being numb, that we don't want to make sacrifices and keep playing the game, because really at that point the worst case scenario is that we do make sacrifices and play the game, and then we benefit those people who are attacking us. We do not want to benefit those people who are attacking us. We do not want to contribute to the game. We don't want the current game. We want a new game. And so the purpose would be sacrifice. The thing that we have lost would be sacrifice. And if we were willing and able to sacrifice in a way that was for a greater reason, for a reason that you would call redemption, then we would all be willing to do it. But because the game is so corrupt and inverted, we don't want to contribute to the game anymore. And you could take it a step further and be like, well, you got to be willing to contribute to the game right now because everything's a cycle, and I know things are kind of bad right now, but they're going to get better. Things aren't getting better. Things are getting worse. And this is really important to say because it's really fascinating. I think we all assume that things are getting better, that society is getting better. Some people are very pessimistic and just always think everything is getting worse, and they actually don't even have a desire to make things better. But for the most part, we have a subliminal assumption that things are getting better, if only because of the nature of time. Time moves forward. We see technology progressing. People talk about stats like people reach for optimism, and they willingly step into naivety and talk about, well, abject poverty has lowered. There's way less people in abject poverty every year. And it's like, yeah, what does that even mean? Because I have my eyes open and I see city hall buildings that were made in 1920. And I see churches that were made in 1500 and 1600. And those buildings are beautiful. Those people who made that had no technology, so we're told. And yet now here we are in the modern world. And the buildings that we create today we can't make anything that's not plastic. We can't make anything that would stand the test of time. Everything that we make is ugly, disgusting, makes us feel worse about ourselves, contributes to the lack of desire to participate in the game, because it's like, well, what is the point if we're building these disgusting plastic buildings with random neon lights and street lights that are oddly different colors. And there's not only is there not divine order, we're not even trying to go for divine order to the way that we structure our society. We're not even trying to go for non-divine order. It's almost like we're deliberately making things ugly. And I don't understand how we can have exponentially better technology pretty much every day, every year. It's unfathomable. So it's said how much better our technology is today than it was 100 years ago. And so how are they making those buildings and we are making these buildings? So things are getting worse. Things are getting worse, and that is okay, because things can still be made better if we talk about the fact that things are getting worse. But I'm not going to sit here and pretend that things are getting better. They are not getting better. They're getting worse. And so it is my opinion that all of these reasons are why men have lost a sense of purpose, because the purpose would be sacrifice, yet we don't want to participate in the game because we don't want to participate the people who are every day increasing their corrupt relationship and their lies regarding their extracting energy from our sacrifices in the game that we are playing. So we don't want to contribute to them receiving fruits based on their corruption. We don't want to contribute to sending society in this current direction because things are getting uglier. We're obviously going in the wrong direction. And so it's a double-edged sword, because we actually need to play the game to be fulfilled. We need to sacrifice. We need to be oriented towards a greater purpose, towards a greater good. But the game that we're playing right now, it is so convoluted and so ugly and so inverted that we just don't want to play. We don't want to play. And I can't help but think that maybe this is actually how it's always been. That this is, in a way, that this is how it's always been, in terms of the world is always against you. The world is always against the individual. And because the world is always against the individual, it forces you to go within yourself, and because you have no other options, because the world is so against you, because you don't want to find meaning in this world, you've got to find meaning in the next world. And so because of the nature of how corrupt this world is, it almost forces you to go to God, which is a good thing. But in that same breath, I can't help but think my point with the empathy thing that I was saying, and seeing these people who are walking around the earth and they are struggling and they are in excess pain, their suffering is too much, and I know the nature of suffering and struggle is going to push people towards resentment and towards being bitterness, and I know that I should control what is in my control and not worry so much about other people, but I can't help but empathize with these individuals. I can't help but see myself as though I may be them as well. And it is not good for their soul if they go towards bitterness and resentment. It is not good for the world. It is not good for their soul. And I can't help but see myself as really no different from them. And if I were truly, literally them, I would want the world to orient itself to people. Have helped me in my life so much. It is unreal. I'm so blessed with the people that I have in my life, and they have uplifted my spirit. They have uplifted my mindset, and I can't help but always be in a state of gratitude and love because of the people, my family and friends who I've had throughout the entirety of my life. And some people are alone, and when you're alone, you feel like the world is against you. And it is my opinion that despite the fact that the game that we are playing is corrupt, and despite the fact that the world is seemingly against you, there are people just like ourselves. There are people just like you. There are people just like me. And they're struggling, and it hurts everybody if they're struggling more than they need to be. And I don't even exactly know what that means, but I do know for a fact that these individuals who are suffering, I can empathize with them and I can feel it in my heart. And I want to strive to be the type of person that can alleviate burdens for other people, because it is right and just. In the same way that people have alleviated my burdens and helped me throughout the entirety of my life, I want to do that for other people, because I don't actually know why, just out of love. And I'm not saying that I'm this great, loving, charitable person, but because if I were them, I wouldn't want to be them. But maybe we can rectify the situation. So despite the fact that the principalities of earth are against us, despite the fact that we are increasingly divided as men, as individuals, as women, as the people, we're divided. We have an option that we can continue to be divided. We can continue to work against each other and make the world a worse place. But if we do that, we are all going to suffer excessively as a result. But we also have the opportunity to come together. And the only way to come together is under a greater purpose. The only way to come together under a greater purpose is to get on the same page. And the only way to get on the same page is to talk about it. And so that's what we've done here. We've talked about it. And that's all I have. Goodbye.